gosh, look at the crowd.
Come this way.
Those who spread goodness radiate happiness to everyone around them. Introducing LOLC Finance Credit Cards. Fuel the goodness in you.
Welcome to LMDtv. I'm Ashwini Vethakan. Joining us this week on Talking Business is the Director and CEO of First Capital Holdings, Dilshan Wirasekara. Welcome to the show, Dilshan. It's good to have you with us.
Pleasure being here, Ashwini. Thank you for having me.
Dilshan, how would you describe the country's economic climate?
So the situation is quite challenging, to say the least, Ashwini. I think we are, as a country, facing the most challenging period that we've had in our history. Obviously brought about by the pandemic, and I would say the current situation is probably even worse than the 30-year civil war that engulfed the country. And as we know, it's a global phenomenon. It's not just local; it's global. I think even though through all these challenges, it's quite important for us as a country, as a nation, as the citizens of this country to be optimistic and look at some of the positives that have come about as a result of these challenges, and see how we can navigate in the future and make the best out of the situation. So obviously, I think the lockdown, travel restrictions that we have has impacted the country, specifically because of the tourism sector, the flows that we, as a result of the tourism sector being closed, that we will be deprived of. And I think a large part of the impact to the economy is coming from that. So we have about 2.5 million tourists a year, close to about $4.5 billion revenues that sector generates, that we've lost out now for the last almost 18 months. And I think we cannot really expect the sector to kick off this year. We can probably look at probably sector reviving in 2022. However, the couple of positives that I see that have sort of come about because of the pandemic is, we've relatively done well as a nation on the vaccination front. So we've got, I think, close to now 10 million people double vaccinated, and plans to cover a major portion of our population, including children above 12, by the next couple of months. And I think it's very realistic if we look at probably the end of the year that we would, as a nation, probably have our entire citizens vaccinated, and thereby the ability to really open up the economy. Another silver lining has been the performance of our equity markets. So if you look at capital markets have done relatively well. Our equity market as of Friday, I think, stands as regionally the best performing market. It could even challenge the world rankings, I would think, and be the top performing market in the world. We are up 40% so far this year, and the outlook we've seen based on some of the company earnings and valuations holds promise for further upside. So that's one thing, I think that's a silver lining. The restrictions with regard to import substitution that was brought about because of the pressures on foreign exchange have also seen some positives with regard to the manufacturing sector. So we've seen the export sector do well. We've seen Sri Lankan companies look at resorting to manufacturing wherever those import restrictions have been placed. And I think as a result, we've seen some progress with regard to the manufacturing sector. So obviously the environment is quite challenging, but I think there are some positives that have come out of it. And as a country and as a nation, if we can sort of further build upon those positives, I think we can weather this storm and still come out of this pandemic in relatively good shape.
What are your thoughts on the government looking at more public-private partnerships?
Yeah, so I think, it's inevitable and it's needed. As you know, the government is stretched for resources. We've seen quite a bit of, if you look at our balance of payments, we've had issues as a result of, like I said, the tourism flows, all of that, remittances dipping. We've also had to repay a lot of debt that we've had specifically foreign currency that has depleted our reserves. And we've resorted to more domestic borrowings that have really taken its toll on our budget deficit and our debt to GDP ratio. We've also seen the pandemic and certain measures the government's taken as a result of giving certain tax breaks, trying to revive the economy, having a lot of pressure on the fiscal side. So the government revenue has dropped quite significantly, while its expenditure has relatively remained unchanged. So obviously that's quite challenging. So I think there is no other way apart from really progressing on the public-private partnership model, because the government really doesn't have the resources to do these developments on their own. And I think, if we've seen some of the models that have been done in Asia and other parts of the world, we've had quite a favorable outcome, specifically I think in the region. If you look at India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, maybe even countries like South Africa, we've seen a large number of PPP projects coming through, and I think that's something that the Sri Lankan government needs to pursue as well. And I think that also builds in more efficiency. As we know, the private sector is far more efficient than our country's public sector. And I think that's where the knowledge and the will to succeed really will come for these projects. So I'm a huge advocate of the PPP model. And I believe if Sri Lanka rolls that out as successfully as some of these countries have that we've seen, I think we will do well. So that's definitely something the government must pursue.
The pandemic definitely added a new level of pressure to the heads of businesses. That being said, how do you think it affected CEO confidence?
Yeah, so I think it's again dependent upon the sector that you're involved in. Like I said, some sectors obviously are more affected by the pandemic. We know the tourism sector, hospitality sector, certain service-related sectors are badly affected. SME type of businesses, which are not really driven by CEOs, but are the backbone of the economy really, are also impacted by the lockdown. But certain other sectors, like I said, the export sector, the manufacturing sector, have been fairly resilient. So I guess CEO confidence will differ depending on who you talk to. From a regional perspective, I think KPMG just did a survey and published it a couple of days ago in terms of the region's corporate leaders. And if you look at it, I think about 60% of corporate leaders were quite confident about the global economy and its recovery over the next 3 years. And that confidence level is up from about 40% at the beginning of 2021. So you can see that CEO confidence level, I think, on a global scale is improving. I think everyone believes that there is an end to this pandemic, and that at some point in time, business and life will get back to normalcy. I think that will all depend on the rollout of vaccinations globally and how well countries actually manage, or how fast countries get their population vaccinated. So I think most CEOs in the region are optimistic, like myself, that things will actually only get better from where it is currently. If you look at even some of the indexes, the manufacturing index, the PMI, all of that, it shows confidence. If you look at our very own Colombo Stock Exchange, it obviously there is confidence with earnings increasing and the valuations becoming cheaper. So I think that confidence will spill through, not just at CEO level, but at a more broader level. And I see that continuously improving, and possibly into 2022, that we really see things normalizing to the levels that it was pre-pandemic.
And on that note, we'll be back after a short break. continue our conversation with the Director and CEO of First Capital Holdings, Dilshan Wirasekara. Dilshan, what are your thoughts on Sri Lanka's IPO culture?
So the IPO culture has got a big boost with the budget proposals of last year, Ashwini. So the budget proposal last year actually gave an incentive for companies to get listed on the Colombo Stock Exchange, thereby getting a 50% corporate tax benefit on your corporate tax rates. So we've seen a increase in the enthusiasm of companies, the interest of companies to list on the Colombo Stock Exchange. So that partly is driven by the incentive on the tax front that has come about. We've already seen about 5 IPOs take place this year, equity IPOs. We've seen quite a few other debt IPOs also take place. In total, the Colombo Stock Exchange, I think, has raised about 75 billion of capital so far in the year, both for debt and equity IPOs. We know that there is a pipeline of possibly another 10 more IPOs that are in the planning stages. And I think some of them may actually complete the listing process before the end of the year. Some of them may get carried forward to the next year. I know the industry is lobbying for the government to continue with the tax incentive because the whole listing process takes some time. So you can't really overnight decide to list and complete in a 12-month sort of a time frame. So I think the industry will lobby to ask for that extension of the tax relief that is already there. And I'm hopeful that the government will view it positively. So there has been a big boom in this whole IPO culture. Another important fact is the valuation. So I think our capital markets have been undervalued for quite some time, specifically over the last 4 or 5 years. We've seen valuations being fairly depressed, and therefore companies really not being able to get the valuation that they deserve, and therefore not really coming on and getting listed. I think with the valuations increasing and we've seen the market sort of rebound, we are still quite very well priced regionally at about 11 times price earnings ratio on the trailing PE, maybe little over 1 time book. If you look at regional markets, they are trading at maybe 17, 18 times PE, maybe 1.7, 1.8 times book. So there is still some way to go there. And I think when those valuations correct a little bit more, you will see more demand by companies to list and access capital. We've also seen a lot of new initiatives by the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Colombo Stock Exchange to bring different class of products. We started an SME board. We've got the first SME getting listed. There are plans to list a dollar board where companies can actually list and raise foreign currency for expansion overseas and so on. So I think all of these measures and new products will only increase the demand and the interest on companies to come and list. So I see a very sort of a bright future for the IPO culture. And I think if the tax incentives prevail on to the next couple of years, that we will see quite a few companies come and list on the exchange. We'll also probably see quite a few state entities that need capital to grow being listed on this exchange to sort of get new investor interest that will fund these expansion projects. So I think the IPO culture is moving in the right direction, Ashwini.
Coming back to the SME sector, Dilshan, given that they felt the brunt force of the pandemic, what do you think needs to be done to help them?
Yeah, so I think there is a lot that can be done to help this sector, and there is no doubt that the SME sector probably has taken the brunt of the blow by the pandemic. There's no doubt about that. I think, there's about 70% of our GDP coming off this sector, and there's a lot that we can do to support this sector. So I think, firstly, central bank has extended the moratorium banks are looking at giving some relief for these SMEs who've been impacted by the closure and the lockdown. And that's a good thing. And I think that that support is sort of required. We've also seen a lot of multilateral agencies like the ADB, IFC come and support the SMEs through project financing type of concessionary loan schemes offered to the banks and the NBFIs. So we've seen that they extend credit to the banks and NBFIs to on-lend to the SME sector. So I think more of that concessionary long-term financing can really help the sector that's been really impacted by this pandemic. But even more so, I believe that as citizens of this country, you and I can do a lot to support the SMEs. And I think that's where the biggest impact can be made, that when we look at our spend, that we focus some of that spend on SMEs as opposed to the multinationals or larger corporates. And I think that can be done at a very broader level by all citizens looking at ways and means of really purchasing goods and services from these SME sector companies. And I think that can be a conscious effort that each of us does that will uplift the sector. So that's one thing. And I think also from a government perspective, extending moratoriums, giving relief, preferential tax treatment for the SMEs are things that can be extended upon by the government that will help for the SME sector to recover from the blows it has been dealt by the coronavirus. So I think there are quite a few things that can be done. I know that there are few things that are being pursued, like the moratoriums and like the relief the government is giving. But I think the bigger impact can come about by a shift in the consumer mindset to direct some of the resources to the SME sector to really revive this sector and to help it recover faster.
That's actually a very good answer. Now, the central bank has announced an extension of its debt moratorium to the 31st of December. How crucial do you think this is for businesses?
I think it's critical. It's critical specifically for the SME type of businesses who have been impacted. I know that the moratorium, when it was given, I think initially and then thereafter extended, there may have been certain segments of clients, certain segments in the banking system that may have not been impacted that negatively by the pandemic. But however, they also would have got the benefits of the moratorium. So I think there has to be a little bit more focus in terms of ensuring only the sector segments of consumers impacted and who need assistance are given this moratorium, and it is not a blanket moratorium for all borrowers. I think that's quite important. And why that's important is because we don't want unnecessary moratoriums to have pressure on the banking sector or the NBFI sector. You see, moratoriums, when you defer loans and give relief for interest, means that the banks also are sort of giving relief, therefore not recognizing income, not recognizing potential non-performing loans. Because you don't know when you give the moratorium, are these companies going to be able to pay them in the future? Because it's only a deferment, it's not a write-off. And that's why I believe that more focus is needed to ensure only the segments of the economy that need assistance are the ones that get it and who benefit out of this, and unnecessarily don't put pressure on the banking system. Because if there is utilization at a level that is not needed, we can actually see that pressure building on banks and potentially higher NPLs and write-offs affecting the banks when these moratorium ends. So I think it's quite important that the To answer your question, the moratorium is required, and I support that. The fact that it has been sort of extended now again up to the 31st of December. We don't know whether it will end there or whether there'll be further extensions. But I think it's important that the regulator as well as the banks who administer the moratorium or extend it to their clients make sure that it is directed to the right segments of the economy that are really hurt by the pandemic and who need these moratoriums. So I think if we do that, we will help those segments of the economy to, especially the SME related businesses, to recover much faster, Ashwini.
Well, this has definitely been an interesting conversation and has shed some light into the financial sector of Sri Lanka. So thank you for joining us on the show this evening, Dilshan.
Thank you very much, Ashwini. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Coming up, we have the latest updates from the nation's burning issues. Stay tuned.
You love the feeling of being renewed. To stay beautiful every single day. To breathe just like we do. Because you are truly delicate. Protecting the ones who've been with us through the years. With Sayalac Care, the only wood coating that truly protects you. Sayalac Wood Coatings from JAT.
Welcome back to the show, and here's an update on Sri Lanka's burning issues. Amid worries of a fourth wave of the pandemic, in addition to rising cases of infections and fatalities, a larger share of respondents to the latest LMD Nielsen IQ Business Confidence Index, or BCI, stated the spread of COVID-19 as a cause for concern than in the previous month. As the viral caseload continued to trend upwards despite reports that half of the population had received at least one dose of the vaccine, when the exclusive survey was conducted in the first week of August, 90% of the survey sample considered the effects of the pandemic to be the most pressing issue for business in Sri Lanka today. This marks an increase from the previous month when 80% of respondents expressed these concerns. Meanwhile, apprehension regarding the impact of inflation on business also appears to be on the rise, with 71% of those consulted by the pollsters citing it as a concern, up from 65% in July. Bribery and corruption is also perceived to be an issue in the business community, according to 41% of respondents. The spread of the coronavirus continues to be cited as the most pressing national issue facing Sri Lanka today by 89% of survey participants, up from 76% in the preceding month. Furthermore, the economy and poverty are highlighted as matters to be considered from a national perspective by 54% and 36% of respondents respectively. And that's all we have for you this week. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for watching and stay safe.